Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. Keith, talk to me, man. I've been having a struggle the last 20 minutes just to get right and get this show going, and here we are. So now I'm better, and I need it. I need a quick little sip of a beverage. So take over for me for a little bit.
You need a sip of a beverage, and I think it's time that we sit down together and do our weekly talk about Seahawks football, because I'm in the mood for spending an hour with a friend and a beverage. So nice. Let's do it.
Yeah, excellent. Welcome in, everybody. It's been a little while since we've had a chance to catch up, and so Keith and I are here back again this week to talk about prospects in the NFL draft. This week we're continuing on the defensive side of the ball with the linebackers and safeties. Been doing a lot of website stuff on the back end, just pulling my hair out on all sorts of different fronts. And I think we'll end up making it right. Don't go on there right now, though, because it is kind of a little hot mess, just because I'm playing around with all sorts of different colors and everything else. No real news this week on the Seahawks front as far as new contracts, players, visits, really anything. It's just kind of been a real quiet week. Anything at all on your end?
No, I mean, as far as like off-season stuff, it's been a really quiet week. I think the team appears to be hunkered down and, doing the last second prep for the draft, and they're done with all the free agency stuff. They might come up with something, right before the draft, but mostly they're in a spot right now. They like where they're at, and they'll see what happens on draft day.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I saw in the news was that the Seahawks and Broncos both announced that they were opting out of the voluntary off-season workouts that usually happen.
Mm-hmm.
They have like the voluntary OTAs where organized team activities where players come in and they work out as a group, and they're like, it's COVID, so no. And I was surprised when I saw it.
Yeah, it worked out last year pretty well after they'd kind of committed to being in the building, and then they spent the rest of the 5 months together pretty much, other than just direct family members. Mm-hmm. And now in these sorts of OTAs, they're just coming out from wherever they're at, and they're going to land and show up. And I don't know what the protocols are in place. I'm sure it's just like anything else. Folks are wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. And it seems to be something that's under control. But I know that a player like Tyler Lockett, for example, is pretty outspoken about being concerned about COVID and so forth. And it's players like that, and they have every right to be concerned. That's totally within their right.
Yeah. So the Seahawks are opting out as a team. Like,
right.
They're just not. They're not doing it. And the reason why I was surprised that it was news was simply because I was under the impression that teams just weren't going to do that. Because we're not talking about like mini camp where they come out and they learn the playbook and they, get that stuff in. We're talking about the OTAs, the off-season workout program where they come in and the coaches get a chance to run them through a bunch of workouts and make sure that they're in a certain level of shape. And for some of them, it lights a fire under them and goes like, oh, I'm not where I need to be before training camp. And they go home and work out harder and that kind of stuff. And we're just talking about that.
Yeah.
And there's just no reason for, there's just no reason to have that in, during COVID, during a pandemic. So I was just surprised that like everyone's like, it's news. These two teams have decided not to do it. And I'm like, hasn't everybody?
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. I'm not, to be completely honest, I haven't been paying attention the last couple of weeks just on internal team scuttlebutt and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I've, obviously keeping up on contracts and whatnot, but yeah, I think we're within what, 3 weeks of the NFL draft. It just feels weird this year. Like it's a kind of a disconnect in a sense with only 3 picks, knowing that there's real no opportunity to get up any closer than we currently are, and we're likely to drop back even further than where we're at. So it's kind of been challenging to get into it this year a little bit. How about you?
Yeah, the 3 picks thing has definitely made it a challenge, and you want to get in it, you want to do your usual work and prep for everything, but it's just not been the same, and it's hard. I mean, they got 3 picks, and you're right, and unless they're going to make a trade of a guy like Bobby Wagner, they're just not going to end up with enough draft capital for this to be a draft that matters that much.
Right.
And yeah, they'll make some trades, look at a couple extra picks. They won't come out of the draft with 3 players. They'll probably come out with 5 or 6. But the first one's probably going to be in the 60s. They might have 2 in the top or 3 in the top 150. That's it.
Right.
They're just
and usually you're clamoring for 3 or 4 in the top 100.
yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting year. I'm looking for one guy that can come in and have some sort of an impact role. And we all think it's going to be a lineman, which probably means that it won't be.
It won't be a lineman.
And they'll draft, a Sam linebacker. It just is what it is. Or a safety, one of those two. And that's why we're here today. Talk about linebackers and safeties, just in case. We'll talk about a couple up in the 50 to 70 range, and the majority of the guys that we'll be looking at will be in the middle rounds, more or less, I would think. So let's just get into it. I've brought my players in. You've brought yours. I would imagine there's some likely crossover here on a couple of players that we've identified that are kind of Seahawky. Why don't you go ahead and start? And I don't have any real order to mine, although I was planning on doing linebackers first and then safeties.
Yeah, let's do linebackers first. I'll give you one that I actually kind of like, and I kind of hope he ends up in Seattle, and that would be North Carolina linebacker Chaz Surratt.
Mm-hmm.
This is a guy that got recruited as a quarterback, started as a true freshman, looked good as a true freshman, then had some injuries, missed a year. When he came back after, missing a year, it was like wrist injuries and stuff. They had a new coach, and the new coach had brought in a, super prospect at quarterback and was basically like, it's his team. And so the choice was either a position change or a team change. And he chose a position change to the defense because he talked to Mac Brown, his coach, and was like, look, my goal is the NFL. And he goes, well, if you want to play in the NFL, you need to move to linebacker because that's where athletically you fit. I think he's a little undersized, 6'2", 228. He's a weak side linebacker or rush linebacker, but you know what? He's really good in coverage too. Smart, instinctive, run comes downhill, great in coverage. He's one of those guys, he's going to be good on special teams. I just think he's a good fit for Seattle, and I kind of just like the story.
Yeah, and he's got a pretty interesting brother who's also a wide receiver in this draft that I think would be actually an excellent fit for Seattle. It'd be crazy if we jettisoned 2 brothers from the team this offseason and ended up getting 2 brothers back in return
That
out of the draft. It would be kind of nuts.
that would be funny.
How big of a, just before we kind of get into the general conversation, how big of a need do we really have at linebacker? And I know what you're going to say, but I want you to kind of think about it in a sense that Jordan Brooks is pretty diverse in what he could do. He could play the Will or the Sam, could be a middle linebacker. Seems like we could, he's more of a strong guy. And to me anyway, I think his skill set now, I think that he's more in line with like being a middle linebacker. But he does have the ability to kind of drop back into coverage and cover tight ends and line up on the outside shoulder of tight ends and all that kind of stuff. But he's good, running downhill, moving to the ball, lateral sideline to sideline as well. That would be kind of
I want him off the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
And that's why the team put him at weak side linebacker and moved KJ in order to do so, was they want him off the line of scrimmage. They want him running to the ball, and not being up engaged with a lineman trying to set an edge. I think that's the better use of his speed and skill set. And I agree. I think that's where he belongs, is off the line. That's why I think he's a Will or a Mike, so a weak side or a middle linebacker. I think he's the heir apparent to Bobby Wagner. And in the meantime, he's the starting weak side linebacker. So to me, that means the team needs a strong side linebacker, and it's either
that's true.
It's either going to be a draft pick or Cody Barton, because those are the options.
Yeah. So is this Chaz Surratt viewed more of an inside guy, or as a strong?
He's more of a guy that's actually a potential fit on the weak side long term. This year he could be used as kind of as a rush linebacker, or a guy that drops into coverage and does some certain things, and they just kind of move people around on the line, because you've got three guys that can play multiple positions. And so basically that would be, if they went with Surratt, that would be the route I would look at. But he's not a great fit for their need. Their need is being a strong side linebacker that can come up, engage with a tackle or tight end, set an edge, and play, on or near the line of scrimmage. He's not a great fit for that, but I just think the talent is there to be an impact player in the future, and the speed and coverage ability, you can't pass that up.
He has the diversity that you really like at that spot.
So especially if once they move Brooks into middle linebacker, let's say a year from now, if they need decide to pick up some draft capital and whatnot and trade Bobby Wagner, moving Brooks into inside linebacker, a guy like Surratt would slide right into that weak side and be a great fit.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting to contemplate the different ideas, and then you've got Jamal Adams as well, who brings sort of a strong safety, strong side linebacker skill set to that position as well. So it does give them some opportunities to bring some pressure and all that kind of stuff, coverage, especially bigger wide receivers and tight ends. A guy that I wanted to talk about first was a guy that I mentioned last week, and I said, well, I'm going to mention him again in the linebacker show, and that's Quincy Roach.
I knew that was coming.
243. And since the last show, he did his pro day, and he's got an 80.38 inch wingspan, and he ran a 4.6240 at 243 pounds, 6'3", and he's really long, and he's athletic. And he started his career at Temple.
4.6 isn't particularly fast, but you know what those numbers sound like? KJ Wright.
Yeah.
Who's super long,
not athletic,
not fast, but athletic, and long, and
yeah. And this guy's kind of a technician, polished with his hands, the length, speed, quickness type of a thing. So he gives you the diversity of being able to play on the edge, and rush the passer. He's got some great pass rush moves, and in fact, he's either an edge guy, with some teams, or he's a 3-4 linebacker. And when we talk about being a strong side guy or an edge guy, that's kind of the role that we're talking about. And I just think that he's a good, solid run defender. I would put him at the Sam. I would have him as a Sam linebacker in our defense.
Agreed.
And allow guys like Dunlap and Taylor and those guys to be up front. And this guy could be, come off some blitzes or stunts or whatever and still rush the passer. But he's going to be excellent in coverage for you and take out the tight end at some level. So he's a 3-down guy. I mean, that's and to me, if you were going to spend what you would need to spend on him, I think that he may be available in like the 4th round, but I think he's going to go earlier than that, just based on his athleticism and upside. I think that you'd have to get him, before the 4th round. So I think if you drop back, picked up a pick, and you would feel more comfortable than expending one on a linebacker, a guy that could play, special teams for you and all that kind of stuff. You'd want to make sure that you tried to get your impact guy first, I think, because, this could be a year kind of a project, kind of a guy. He's right on that level where he could play right away, but you're probably going to have to protect him a little bit. So that first pick at 56 to 62 or 65, I think that you want to spend that. And you're not supposed to really draft for need and specific spots, but I think this is the year where they just really could use a center. And I think that drafting an offensive line
and a corner,
I just think that those are priorities. And a guy like this may get pushed out for something like that.
Yep. Yeah, the earliest player that I have the Seahawks looking at, out of all the people on my list here, is Cameron McGrone, the linebacker from Michigan. More of an inside linebacker, but good, just super instinctive, comes downhill, attacks the line of scrimmage, makes a lot of tackles within 1 yard of the line of scrimmage, which is great. I mean, if you have a guy that ranks, that gets a ton of tackles, but they're all 6 yards downfield, it doesn't matter. Like those tackles aren't production.
Nice.
And he just looks like a guy that I think Pete Carroll, like, am a little concerned, with his coverage skills, especially because you're looking at a guy that is going to be asked to cover tight ends, and his work in coverage, he needs some work. He needs some coaching. He needs to play within himself a little bit more and stop trying to do too much.
But he's an animal. He's a guy that really likes the physicality of the sport and hitting,
and that's why
and all that grittiness, right?
And he likes to blitz, but he also isn't one of those guys that lives to blitz. He lives to tackle. He wants to go kill running backs, and you kind of like that. And I think he's just the guy that Pete Carroll's going to love.
Yeah, I like a guy in the same division from Ohio State, the Pete Werner guy, 6'3", 243. He's kind of the same sort of a feel, where he's very instinctive, very hardworking, lunch pail kind of guy, 3-down guy. He's got quick read ability, locates the ball, flows to coverage, but likes to hit. It's a guy that just likes to blitz, hit people, knock some heads in. And you kind of want that. Especially for your young guys on your team, the guys that are just coming in. Those are the guys that are the enforcers. Guys like Marquise Blair. You get guys like Marquise Blair and Adams and a guy like this or something on your team. You're starting to change that mentality around on the defense. It seems like we've been a little soft for a while. I think last year we got a little better, but
last year they obviously it looked bad early on in the year, but in the second half of the year, when the defense was really good, it was much improved. That defense wasn't soft. I mean, you look at guys like Adams and Poona Ford and Dunlap coming in. These are guys that just wanted to attack and play fast and physical and just really high energy, and you're like, this is the defense that I remember. And the
Hmm.
Seahawks have needed that. I mean, you had Cam Chancellor who just kind of set that tone, and everyone, rose to his level, and they haven't really had that. Um, until last year. Like there was a gap in there where they just didn't have that physicality on defense that you want.
Interesting. Yeah. You know, so you mentioned earlier that you think the team is strictly looking for strong side, but it's been proven over and over with John Schneider that he kind of defies logic in these things once in a
Mm-hmm.
while and just drafts a guy because they
Because he
love
likes him.
him or
Yeah.
whatever. Would you consider a guy like, three guys, and they probably going maybe too high for what they're looking for, but like a Jamin Davis, who's almost strictly a will linebacker, Dylan Moses, same thing, but he's got from Alabama, super strong tackler, really good in
I don't
coverage, or
see
a
any
Baron
either of
Browning, middle
those.
linebacker, kind of a prospect.
I don't see those first two being available for Seattle. And I didn't have Browning because I thought it would have to be Seattle's first pick
Hmm.
in order to get him. And I
So
think that,
you think Jamin Davis is going to go before 56? That's an
yeah,
interesting rise for him, in the off season, because I don't think that he was quite at that level heading into February, and but he's since um, ran a 4.4940 at 6'3", 234, and had a 42-inch vertical and a 132 11-foot broad jump, which shows tremendous bursts and athletic ability and leg drive,
well,
all that kind of stuff.
and a
So,
lot of it has to do with the fact that, um, they're looking at you're looking at a guy from Kentucky, right? How many football players are at Kentucky?
hmm,
I mean, they have a team, but if you're scouting Kentucky, you're probably scouting basketball, and
yeah, they have
so
a few players now and again. I mean, they'll still play teams like Missouri and
oh,
all,
of course they will. And so I'm not saying that. I'm just saying
Yeah.
like scouts that are in this and do it professionally with a team, I'm sure have been all over a guy like Jamin Davis from the beginning. But those people that do this as a media person, you're going to start scouting your Ohio States and Michigans and LSU's and um, Alabama's, and it'll take you a while to get around to Kentucky. And that's probably why he was rated low early and is starting to climb, because as they start to actually watch tape on these guys, they get a better feel for just how good he can be.
Yeah. Well, and one of the reasons why I wrote down Dylan Moses as well is because I've noticed that his draft stock is falling lately a little bit, but he's one of the most ferocious hitters in all of college football.
Mm-hmm.
And a guy like that, um, when you think about a guy that maybe could come in at some point and replace Bobby Wagner, um, with a guy that has tremendous upside and the similar speed that Bobby does, similar size, sideline to sideline range, and his hitting power is just at an insane level. When ball carriers meet him, they know that they met him, and he's driven them, back into the ground.
So why is he dropping?
Well, I mean, there was some talk early on that he might be a first round guy, and people started to realize that linebackers are not as valued as some of the other positions. I think guys are just rising up are taking his place, in that top 50 or whatever. So I'm thinking there might be a chance that he's available at 50 to 60, and so I think anybody that is in that boat is a guy that you have to consider. I mean, the Seahawks are in that range, and so you're looking at that bucket of players that's available, and a guy like Dylan Moses, while might be slightly redundant now, offers enough scheme diversity where he could line up at will or Sam for you, depending on what you want to do with Brooks, and eventually he could move over into the middle linebacker spot. At some point, whether it's this year, next year, or the year after, we're going to be having this conversation seriously about replacing Bobby Wagner, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the team, like you said, may end up finding a suitor in, in a draft day type trade. I don't know. It's such an unpredictable offseason. And with Schneider it's just impossible to really know what the desire level is to pick up additional draft collateral, and we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about trading your. I mean, he's like the heart of that defense. I mean, he's the multi-year All-Pro guy that just makes that defense tick, and so trading him is not something that you do because
Right.
there's
Well, I
a
mean,
because
Belichick does that sort of stuff. You're just like shocked, like, wow, they got rid of him a year or two ahead of time, and it seems to work. It's just hard. And now we've solved our salary cap issues for now, and likely will be okay the rest of the way. But he's got a big number. It's bigger next year at $20 million. $20 million to pay a middle linebacker, Keith. My goodness, I know he's really good, but at some point,
that's quarterback
we're
money.
going to see a diminishing return on that investment on the field. And I don't know when it's going to come. I know that he's been breaking down a little bit more the last 2 years. And last year, they had him working inside a lot more, and he was getting beat up. And just because of the protection, in the middle has just been okay for him. Poona Ford's awesome, but he's typically not taking massive double teams. And Jaron Reed wasn't either. They were, offensive lines were more concerned with our outside guys and shutting that down, and because they weren't getting anything in the middle really. And Bobby Wagner was exposed quite a bit. I think that's, it's got to take a toll over a long period of time. He's been one of the league leaders, certainly the team leader in tackles the last 8 or 9 years. My goodness,
He led the NFL.
Aching.
He led the NFL in tackles. I think it was 3 years in a row, and then last year he was third.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's brutal, though. I mean, think about.
That's a lot of contact.
That's a lot of contact. Anyway, all right. What else do you got, Keith?
I'm looking for Jordan Smith from UAB. That's the guy.
I wrote his name down.
He's a guy I like because one, I mean, he's coming from a small school, and so you're looking at guys that are really hungry, that play it because they really love it. But as a linebacker, the guy who's 6'6", 255, that's size.
That's a throwback dude right there.
and but he's a guy that does it with incredible
he's
quickness.
An outside guy.
He does it with incredible quickness and athleticism. I see him like you stick him instantly at the Sam linebacker and you'll leave him there. And if you need him, if you want him to play in the nickel, you bring him up and let him rush the quarterback. He's just super athletic and long and
UAB, huh? That's crazy. They haven't had anybody drafted for
2015 was the last time.
2015, yeah.
Yep.
Isn't that crazy? So 6'6", 255. So are you sure he's not like a full-time edge guy or 5 tech in Seattle's scheme?
Oh, he
given
would
that
he would,
the arm
he wouldn't
length
be the
at
5
33
tech.
and a half, and
he wouldn't be a 5 tech. He'd be the Leo on the other side. And that's the thing is you could
play at the 7 and 9 spots.
Yeah, I mean, you could totally do that with him, and play him there.
What kind of speed does he have? At that,
I don't know. Because without the combine, it's really hard to actually get those numbers. But his play speed is fast. You watch him, watch any tape of him, and he plays faster than the other people on the field. And I just think that he's a guy that's that big and that strong and plays really fast. You can have him at the strong side linebacker and let him do all the things he needs to do there. You can bring him up and rush the passer on obvious passing downs.
Interesting.
He is Bruce Irvin without having to use the 12th or the 15th overall pick for him.
Yeah, I was trying to look up his 40 time or any other agility type stuff on him.
Good luck finding it from a UAP
I
player.
know. It's crazy. Well, you'd think he would have had his, it looks like he's shown to have 4.7 estimated 40 time, which could be anywhere from 4.5 to 4.8,
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, at that size, you get a guy that's running 4.65 or 4.7 from like a Leo spot or whatever. That's still fairly good and significant, and
Yeah.
for a linebacker, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, he like, I don't know. He looks faster than that when you watch the film.
Yeah.
And at
I'll have
250,
to take
at
a look. What
255.
is it? Is he? He's in kind of a top 100. On several big boards I've seen. Some have him a lot lower than that as well. A player
Mm-hmm.
like that is really hard for a amateur scout to identify and to get information on. Where do you actually think that he goes in the draft, given the skill set and maybe not the competition?
I think rounds 3 or 4, somewhere in the middle
Yeah,
of the
somebody
draft.
might get a good value. You never know with a guy like that.
The thing is, what when I was watching him, he looks like the Sam version of when I watched Bobby Wagner. And of course, I didn't really scout Bobby Wagner before he was drafted.
I didn't either.
Because
I knew of him, but that was it.
Because who scouts Utah State?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so I was really big on Levante David, who went one pick later and has had a tremendous career in Tampa. But smaller school guy. But you go back and after the draft, I went back and watched Bobby Wagner tape just to see what the Seahawks thought of him and why they picked him. And you go, oh, right, that is play speed. It's not just running a 40 down. It's how fast you play. Your ability to get off a block and then sprint to the sidelines and not let the running back get around the corner. And that's the kind of stuff that you saw. And Smith feels like the outside linebacker version of that. Small school guy, but man, does he just his talent and the speed and everything, it just shows up when you watch him.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, a guy like that in a later round, the fourth round pick at 130 or wherever we're at, that might be something that we would do. You just don't know, especially at that in those rounds and later. As a team, you're just looking for complete upside at that point.
Yeah,
and not necessarily position, and because almost everything you're drafting for from that point on is for the future. And a guy like that's going to give you immediate help on special teams if he does get on the field for you, and then that's awesome. Right now we have Cody Barton, and this will be Cody's third year coming up, and I still don't really know what we've got. I was excited when he first got on the field. He showed a little bit of athleticism, but then he kind of got swallowed up with some of the bigger players, offensive linemen. Really didn't have great hand usage or upper body strength to be able to engage and throw off offensive linemen, that were getting in his way. And a guy like this, though, wouldn't have that problem, which would be fascinating. And if he's just as fast or faster than Cody Barton, then wow, that would be interesting. All right, so let's talk about safeties. Do you have any more linebackers?
Only other one. I mean, I had a couple, but just as a very late round, let's say they skip the position because they think they're okay, or they just know they have bigger needs. Watch for KJ Britt out of Auburn, in like the 6th or 7th round. A guy that is, I mean, he's only 6 foot, 240 pounds, but he just explodes upfield and crushes ball carriers.
Is that a guy that you would consider more of an inside guy?
I think I would. The reason why I would consider him at strong side linebacker is because he is good up near the line of scrimmage. He's a guy that you can put on the outside and have him set the edge and not get out physicaled by anyone trying to push him inside, so that way the running back can get around the corner.
Yeah. What do you think about him being a little undersized? And as far as he's like 6 foot and is arms are 30 inches and 3/4.
I think that um, he's such a good tackler, and the motor just doesn't stop. I mean, it's
Yeah.
when you're watching him play, you're not going to find anyone working harder than him out there. And I think that we're talking about a 7th round pick, right?
So mostly special teams.
Mostly special teams
right.
early, and see what you've got with him.
Exactly.
But I think that he's a guy that we were
Guys like
talking
that
earlier
end
about.
up being like tackling machines.
Yes. And we're looking at guys we're looking for guys that just have that attitude and set that, we need more guys that just set the tone with their effort and their
Right.
play and just how much they love hitting people.
Yes.
You can't have enough of those guys in your
That's
defense.
why I like Dylan Moses.
Yep.
I think that he's probably gone, unless he just falls, and who knows, but anywho. Safeties. It's an interesting year for safeties. I think it's actually pretty deep, more or less. I think you can get really strong role players all the way through the draft. There's a couple of guys that, up front that aren't going to be available for the Seahawks. Guys that start to be in Seattle's range are interesting. Let's talk about the team roster first. The notable is the fact that we don't have obviously Tedrick Thompson's not been there for a while, but Delano Hill is not on the roster anymore.
He was. He was on the roster, but not really on the roster because even when he was on the roster, he wasn't available because he'd get out there, he'd play for a game, look like a guy. You're like, all right, we can. He can develop.
Tedrick Thompson. Hey, he'll
be
him.
He'll be good. And then he got hurt. Oh, right. Well, he's not out there. He managed to stick around for 4 years, despite the fact that he barely played because he was always hurt. But when he did play, he looked pretty good. I mean, when Tedrick Thompson got hurt a couple of years ago, and they brought him in to become the starter there, the defense suddenly got much better. And you're like, oh, okay. But then he got hurt. And then the last 2 games, without both of them, the defense was bad again. And so it was like, what are you going to do? So
right.
I don't think they're maybe losing something on paper, but they're not losing that much by having Leno out off the roster. And that's just really unfortunate.
Yeah, interesting. So what do you think about the depth, though, beyond that? So we've got Adams, and Adams is under contract this year, and then he's a free agent. And I know they want to try to get.
Well,
this is his 5th year, right? 5th year option this year.
Yeah,
that's why he's playing at the 9 point whatever, and then he's got the franchise tag.
But then he's got the franchise tag.
And so you could enter into a contentious negotiation period with him, even though you don't want it to be. You might be on the same page 95%, but when it comes right down to it, paying somebody like him $18 million a year is going to be difficult. And then Diggs is in his last year of his contract at $6 million unguaranteed. And then behind that, I was just trying to see what we've got. So we've got what do we have, Keith? Who's the one player that I'm thinking of who came in for Jamal Adams last year?
Ryan Neal.
So Ryan Neal started out as a cornerback, coming up through practice squads and so forth. And based on his size and athletic profile, they switched him over to safety this year. Was that just out of a necessity and a need, or was that something that's long-term in his plans?
Oh, he's been both. He's a guy that they like as a safety because of his athletic profile and that kind of stuff. But he's long, he's tall, he's got some speed and some range. He fits the profile of a Seahawk corner. Like, he's a safety, but he for the Seahawks, he could be corner, right? I mean, that's Trey Flowers, who was a safety in college, and they converted him. And so they moved him back and forth, and I think they really just decided, yeah, he needs to be a safety. They need to commit him to one spot and let him develop. And he honestly,
that's interesting.
He looked good. He looked good there.
He looked better in coverage than he did coming up and hitting
Yeah.
somebody. He's not that guy. He's not that physical intimidator kind of strong safety.
Yep.
But he is really pretty solid in coverage, especially
Which is
with running backs and tight ends.
mm-hmm.
And it's better than Jamal Adams. At least what Jamal showed us last year. It's tough to evaluate Jamal because the coach is asking him, and he's basically telling the team what he's going to do. As far as his skill set is concerned, he's better up around the line of scrimmage than dropping back into coverage. And this other guy is,
you forget his name already.
I know, completely the opposite, right? He's just completely the opposite, better in coverage.
Yep. Well, that's why I think Ryan Neal, he was the backup strong safety because who else did they have?
They don't. And that's what I'm trying to get to for right now is Delano Hill is no longer on the roster. You had Ryan Neal, and he's not really a completely true strong safety. So
he's a guy that
commit to that.
He's a third safety and a guy that would be the backup free safety, and
which I think would be a mistake.
And the backup strong safety is probably going to be Marquise Blair.
That's true, but they have him on the roster as a free safety.
So
I know, I they're all hybrid kind of guys. They all kind of mix and match. I get that. So with Diggs possibly entering the final year of his deal, unless he gets extended, which is possible. Do they look in the draft seriously at safety this year? It's one of those position groups where you're like, the need isn't quite like there, but I could get it if they picked one.
Find a project. Find a guy that you look at and you go, okay, they're not ready to play now. They can come in, they can be a backup, they can play special teams, but you see the athleticism, you see the fire, and you see the this is someone that we can coach, and they'd be a guy, and then be ready to play.
I got a guy. I'll start from the back of my list and move forward.
Do it.
Since you've talked about it. Jacoby Stevens. He's an interesting guy.
LSU.
6'1", 217, 235. Like, this guy's a big guy. So is he a strong side? Is he a strong safety? Yes.
At that size, yeah.
Is he a strong side linebacker? Yes. Yes, he is.
Maybe.
What would I draft him for? I would draft him to be a strong side linebacker, actually. I kind of meant to talk about this guy earlier, but this is a guy that's probably going to go in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. 6'1", 217, 230 at his low range. He showed up at the Senior Bowl at 217. He played, his weight at LSU was 235. He's got a 78-inch wingspan, a 42-inch vertical jump, 130-inch broad, 11 feet. Ran a 4.51, I think, 4.49, something like that. Large, tough safety, makes plays in the box, instinctive, heads up kind of play. Works hard, fires up the field when he's out there. He's kind of a team leader kind of a guy. It's interesting. I mean, he's densely built, so he could end up playing strong side for you. He's big enough, long enough, fast enough, physical enough to kind of play that Jamal Adams role. And what better thing to have on your team to back up Jamal Adams than another Jamal Adams? And that's kind of what this guy is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking maybe that would be my long shot guy at the back end that could come in and kind of do everything. And the reason that he's lower in the draft is because just a little bit of inconsistency and the fact that he's a tweener. He's just one of those guys. Nobody really knows what he should be. A little big to play strong side all the time, a little undersized to play strong side linebacker or strong safety. He's just kind of right in the middle. And so anyway, That's my low end guy.
So my low end guy is Quintario Cole.
Never heard of him.
Um,
That's crazy.
out of Alcorn State.
Wow.
Here's a guy who's 6'3", 190. And he played.
Sounds
Um,
like a corner.
he kind of sounds like a Seattle corner,
Yeah.
actually, at 6'3". But here, he fits what Seattle has, had, in that he's a guy that started out as the deep safety in a single high set, in a cover 3 scheme, and was that center field roamer, and did that, and then as that was his freshman year, and then as he progressed through the years, he got closer and closer to the line of scrimmage, and was playing strong safety at the end, where he was up hitting people and that kind of stuff. But mostly he was covering tight ends and running backs and doing it really well. And this is a guy that, because of where he played and everything, you're talking about a project. You're talking about a guy that has all the physical like traits you could ever possibly want. But you got to teach him.
Yeah.
You got to teach him where to be, how to, a lot of the stuff. He is as raw as they get. And
Wow. That's
but
the
for a
kind
guy,
of that's a guy that, you may expend a 250th overall pick on in the back end of the 7th round
mm-hmm,
to be your priority free agent signing.
yeah,
A guy that you don't want to miss on, a guy that can make your roster, and play special teams for you, and you just unpackage them over time and you see what you have.
yeah. And honestly, he reminds me of Ryan Neal, although I think he's a
Yeah.
little faster.
Yeah.
He's a
Interesting.
little better equipped to cover the back, and be the center field guy. But
Wow.
similar player. But it's
Yeah.
going to take
He's
him.
my, what is he? He's my 349th ranked player on my big board.
Well, yeah,
That
I'm
I've put
looking
together.
at the Draft Network, and they've got him ranked 254.
Interesting.
Um,
Nice.
and so
Well, there you go. Right in Seattle's pocket.
yeah. Um, and I don't know. He's just the guy that I like. I think that talent wise, it really fits what Seattle wants. And it's a guy that could be um, a starter in the future if you can develop him. And at the 250th pick, that's what you're getting.
I got a guy. My first guy on my list, actually, he's a local in the Northwest, Javon Holland.
Mm,
It's probably going to go early, unless there's so many players though in between the 40 to 70 range that are graded similarly to me, and you never know which one of those guys is going to drop down. This guy could definitely be it. He's got the ball skills, and he's very smooth and great hands, body control. He's better in coverage than tackling, but he's not bad. He's just a little thin, needs to put on a little bit of weight. But his ball skill coverage is more like a corner, or a nickel guy. So it kind of reminds me of Amadi a little bit, except he's a little bigger. Another guy that I would consider as well, and we talked about strong safety ability, or somebody coming in to be a strong safety rotation guy, is Jamar Johnson out of Indiana, 6'2" and a quarter, 205 pounds. I think he's a little underrated, but he's explosive, in his coverage and hitting people, is feisty. We talked about the ability to kind of bring an attitude on that defense and kind of infuse that into the team, and we need that going forward, because guys like Bobby Wagner, I mean, they're awesome leaders and so forth, but they're just not quite as physical beasts as they used to be. Pretty smart with the way he wants to use his body and so forth as the clock winds down. But this guy, a guy like this, is he had 2 picks against Justin Fields in one game, and he's had experience starting at free safety even at that size. Had 42 tackles, 35 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 4 interceptions, 4 pass breakups, all Big Ten. So that's that's an interesting guy, but he'd be closer to the top. The other guy I like is Tanaloa Hufanga, safety out of USC, 6'1",
Yep,
215.
he was on my list.
He's kind of a complete guy, hybrid guy that can play up in the box and break down into coverage for you. He's got good bursts, sideline to sideline kind of a thing. Pretty explosive player, good tackler. Yeah. I mean, I got a few more. That's,
It's the thing is you have to look at this and you go, okay, well, what does the team believe that they're at safety?
Yeah, exactly.
They've got their two starters, they've got their primary backup,
but they're both playing on 1-year contracts. I mean,
true.
Yeah, you've got a little bit more option with Jamal Adams, but nonetheless.
But you've also got Blair and Ryan Neal, right? So you've got other guys on the roster that look decent.
I definitely want to see what we've got in Marquise Blair.
Yeah. And you've got Amadi, who is skill diverse and can literally play free safety, slot corner, and outside corner. And
that is a nice thing to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, so they've got 5 guys on the roster that can and have played safety in the NFL. And that tells me, I'm like, where are they going to see for value? Yes. And yeah, it would be nice to have, because the 2 starters are on the last year of their contract, but
well, the Seahawks have always valued that position higher than a lot of teams.
Yeah.
You take a look at the history of Pete Carroll and stuff. They like their linebackers and they like their safeties, almost more than any other position on the defense, it seems. I just, it's interesting though, when you do, like behind Adams and Diggs, I think the talent level drops off enough to where you're kind of going, yeah, there could be an opening there, a guy that can come in, especially if they carry, let's just say four corners and 5 safeties, or whatever, how it works, because of the diversity of skill sets that cross over in a couple of the guys. It is interesting. I think there might be an opening, especially Nico Thorpe isn't probably going to come back at all. And they need one guy, I think, between the two groups at least, right?
I think they need a corner. They absolutely need a corner, which is why we saved corner for last in our walk through all the different positions. But they absolutely need a corner. I think they could use 2.
I know. And sometimes I go through mock drafts, Keith, and I kid you not, I pick 2 corners because there are quite a few different guys that I really like.
Well, yeah,
especially if both of them.
You end up getting a guy that you go, okay, that guy can play on the outside, and then later you're like, this guy's really good as an inside corner. I'm just going to take him. Yeah, and that's, you end up with that, especially in this draft. So the only other safety that I would throw out there is out of Pittsburgh, Paris Ford. Right? 6 foot, 197, can play both positions and just plays with speed. Like, the guy can fly. Sometimes he has to fly because he takes bad angles. He needs some coaching. But you can't
early on when I first started looking at prospects, and this is at the back end of January, Paris Ford was up higher on a lot of different draft boards. I noticed he's now buried,
he's buried because when you start looking at the film and not the highlights show him flying across the field and making a big play, and you're like, whoa, like Earl Thomas does that, right?
Well, he opted out too.
Yeah. But then you start looking at the actual film and you see, oh, here he's coming flying in to make a tackle downfield, but the reason he had to was because he took a terrible angle and then had to use his speed to catch up. And when you start seeing those kind of things, those players drop.
Yes.
And so you're looking at a 7th round pick type of guy, because he doesn't always take, proper angles, and sometimes he just overcommits.
Yeah, it
But
is interesting. You get a guy that has the skill set prerequisites, the speed, the sideline to sideline type stuff, the ball skills, but a guy that's just out of position all the time. You can coach a lot of that, and
mhm,
especially you get a team like Seattle who really does a good job with their defensive backs overall. Guy like that, maybe he just needs to be coached up better, get into a scheme specific situation. I don't know what his exact deal is, where he would fit the best, but yeah, a guy like that
mhm.
would be interesting, especially, either the back end of the draft, or you buy a pick in the seventh round, or he's a priority guy at the end. Um,
Yeah.
guys like that, the super athletic guys with a little bit of size, are tremendous special teams guys too. And
Mhm.
and that's what you're looking for, I think, more than anything when you get to that level, is you're looking for a guy that can stick on the roster. You don't want to carry a bunch of guys that you know for sure are going to be on the practice squad. You're trying to get guys that are going to stick, at least compete for a spot. And guys like Paris Ford at 6 foot, 200 pounds, with 32 and a half, 33-inch arms, and some good burst and some tenacity and all that kind of stuff. They got a good shot, especially even if they're getting drafted at 250 or whatever. It doesn't mean they can't make the roster. So is that it?
Yeah. That's my the
I had
back
a
of the
couple. I
draft
had a couple
guys.
more. I got James Wiggins, kind of a too high free safety, maybe not a single high guy, and then Caden Stearns would be more of a single high guy, but he's got good size at 6 foot 210. Um, very smart and instinctive, good feel for the game, good coverage skills, aggressive, all that kind of stuff. But he's more of a back end guy, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and then my favorite guy, Jacoby Stevens. I like that guy for some reason. I'm drawn to him. So so that was good. So linebackers and safeties are out of the way. The last remaining, we're not going to do kickers and punters and those guys. Why? Um, Centers, or not centers, but long snappers. We don't even mention his name because he does such a good job.
Well, that's the
And
thing is the Seahawks have, I mean, in terms of those three,
yes,
kicker, punter, and long snapper, they've got a great talented
yeah,
group.
exactly.
Um, and I know that Myers wasn't the most popular guy because of his paycheck and whatnot, but he's good. He hit
He's been solid.
he didn't he set a franchise
He's like
record for
30
most
some odd.
consecutive?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's there. And there was a 61 yarder in there too. So,
true.
I mean, and then of course you got an all pro with Dixon, your punter. And as you said, like we don't even mention the long snapper's name because you only mention a long snapper if they do something stupid.
He
And since
got extended last year too. I think that was
he
the only time
did,
we
and
named him.
he earns it. Um, One of the things that was interesting when they brought him in was that the punter, not Dixon, the one before him,
John Ryan.
John. Yes, I'm like picturing his face. I remember his wife's name. Uh, but yeah, he was saying that when the ball comes from, it comes back hot. Like he gets more velocity on those snaps back to the punter than he was used to. So it gets there. It's not just accurate; it gets there in a hurry. And I thought that was interesting. So it's like you got a guy that
The one thing I valued
is
about
really
him
good at it.
was his coverage.
He
He could get
does.
down the field.
He gets down the field.
Yeah,
Yep.
interesting. So next week is corners.
Mm-hmm.
Everything from, oh gosh, I mean, you could draft one right away if you fell in love with a guy like Eric Stokes. We've been talking about him
I
for a
like
while.
Eric
Tyson
Stokes.
Campbell. There's a number of guys that you could be enamored with. Paulson Debo, Avery Thomas, Robert Rochelle, Benjamin St. Just, Afide Melifumanu, Shakur Brown,
Yep.
Kerry Vincent. I mean, there's this whole slew of guys, Keith Taylor, that are are big. Rodarius Williams, Marco Wilson. There's probably 20 guys that you could draft on the Seahawks, and I wouldn't blink an eye. It would be like one of those deals where, yeah, that makes sense. That fits.
Yep.
So it'll be a good list, good conversation next week.
Yeah, and it's why we saved it for last, is because one, it's like the need on the roster, right?
Yes, that's true.
I mean,
Yeah.
you could they need a center, but the truth is, if they have to, they can go into the year with Posick as a starter.
And they got Kyle Fuller as a backup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but where are your corners? Trey Flowers and Ahkello Witherspoon, and Reed.
Yes.
Like those are your corners, and you've got
in
need
a strange
corner.
sort of way. I could see the Seahawks going into the year with that.
Yeah, I can too, but I don't want them to.
Yeah. Well, maybe they know something or feel better about Ahkello than we all do. I just don't know that we've been all paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, we really liked him coming out of Colorado, during the draft process, and felt like a kind of a Richard Sherman type of guy. And he hasn't quite panned out that way, but he had a solid season last year. And it'll be interesting to see if that turns into something really solid with Seattle, because he could end up being the starter. I mean, they could go into the season with Reed and Witherspoon, and it wouldn't surprise me. On the other hand, it'd be really nice if a guy like Witherspoon or even Reed, Reed has some scheme diversity to him as well. He can move around a little bit for you. It'd be nice to have another like premier guy. I just don't think we're going to get it at 2 whatever, if we were to draft, early, even if in that 4th round pick at that area where a guy like Benjamin St. Juste might last until, the guy's, somewhat unproven overall. I mean, you're going to throw him as your starter. I mean, he'd have to really jump out at you after you got him into camp. And he's got the capability. I mean, mentally, I really like the guy. But a guy like Robert Rochelle, who's ranked right there with him, to me isn't quite as ready. So I would totally take St. Juste over like a Rochelle right now.
Well, let's have this conversation next week.
Okay. Let's do. So anything else going on, Keith?
No, really not. We're in that place where it's just prep for the draft, and the draft is coming up.
The draft is coming up.
That draft weekend is the second most popular weekend on the calendar for men to get vasectomies.
Nice.
You know why?
Wow.
Because then they have an excuse to sit on the couch and watch TV.
That's funny.
You know what the most popular one is?
Super Bowl?
No.
Rounds
1, 2, 3, and 4, like that opening weekend of, or the first 4 days of the NCAA tournament.
Interesting.
So the round of 64, the round of 32.
Wow. Nice.
One of those weird, interesting.
Maybe we should do some advertising then on our website for that.
No, it's not.
Doctors specialize in that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. Yep. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at MW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter, SeahawksPlaybook.com. Has all of the shows, and find us on your favorite podcast app. I think literally everyone, and YouTube, of course, YouTube. So until next time, Keith, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.